Okay, so we talked about the Olmecs. Now let's move on to the Maya. The Maya, as I stated earlier, were around during the formative pre-classic era. Around 1800 BCE is where you start to see the first Mayan villages. And towards the end of the pre-classic period, you start to see the Mayans developing their city centers or ceremonial centers. And so you're going to really see them blossom during the classic period. Okay. Now, like the Olmecs, the Mayans were an agricultural society, but the area where they lived wasn't really the best agricultural land, and so they had to utilize it the best way that they could. A lot of the area where they were is rainforests, and the soil there is very thin. And so they had to find ways around this. There were also a lot of hillsides there in that territory, and so it's not always easy to farm on the hillside. Usually, you want nice flat land, you want to flatten it out, and that's how we farm today. But there are ways of farming on hills, okay, and the Mayans did that. And so one of the methods that they used to farm this land, this rainforest land, was raised fields. Okay, meaning that, like say if they were in a wetland type of area, normally you wouldn't farm in wetlands, but they would raise the fields upon these wetlands, meaning that they would pack up a bunch of soil in a mound, in mounds on these wetlands, and then farm in those raised fields. And so they would pack up earth, pack up the soil up to a certain level, so it's not down in the wetland area anymore. It's not in water, and then they would use that for farming, so that they could utilize wetlands now for farmland. Another example would be on the hillsides, like I mentioned earlier. They would do terrace farming, and let me show you a picture of what that would look like. Okay, so here's an example of these terraces that you would see in the hillside. So normally you wouldn't farm on the side of a hill, but if you create these terraces, these little like steps, you can see here if you look closely, they look like steps. Those are terraces. Each one of those is like a flat level terrace here where you could plant various goods there. You could do your herbs, your plants, whatever you need right there on the side of the hill, and so you're utilizing that land that you otherwise wouldn't in normal agriculture. Okay, and so this is the foundation of Mayan society. This is how they fed themselves, and so that's the basis of their society. Okay, like the Olmecs, the Mayans had a social hierarchy or social stratification. Now we're starting to move into the classic time period where you're going to see social stratification increase even more so, right, than in the pre-classic time period. And so with the Mayans, on top of their social hierarchy, of course, is going to be the king, right? The Mayans lived in a number of different city kingdoms, right? And each city had its own king, all right? Sometimes they would go to war with each other. Maybe they would conquer another one, and then that king could take over another kingdom. That happened at times. Sometimes these city kingdoms would have villages near them or nearby that they also ruled over. Okay, but I just don't want you to get the idea that the Mayans were like one big empire with one emperor ruling all the cities. No, the cities had their own kings. So the king is in the top of the social hierarchy. Now, below the king, you have the noble class. Maybe you're not familiar with that term noble, but basically what it's referring to is the noble families, these upper class families who are on the top of the upper class of society, right? They are the top of the top. These are like the biggest, wealthiest families in these Mayan city kingdoms. Okay, and they owned the majority of the land in those kingdoms as well. So very powerful, very influential, very wealthy. These noble families. Okay, below the noble families, you have the priestly class, and the priestly class is an educated class. The Mayans excelled in their knowledge of astronomy and mathematics. The Mayans also had their own writing system, scribes, right? So a lot of these individuals came from the priestly class. They were the educated individuals who knew all that information. Commoners did not. That's why when many members of the priestly class were killed, with the invasion of the Spaniards, a lot of information was lost, but not all of it was lost. Some was maintained, right? Because the priestly class are the keepers of that wisdom, okay? Below the priests, you have artisans and high-skilled laborers. These are individuals who are responsible for the construction of the city kingdoms, right? The pyramids, stone sculptures, large stelae. These are highly trained individuals who are responsible for that. Okay, and then at the bottom of Mayan society, of that social structure, the hierarchy, is the peasants. And the peasants, the commoners, they're basically responsible for farming. They're the ones who are feeding society. They're the ones who are farming in those raised fields or possibly on those terraces. Okay, so they're the ones who are feeding society in this agricultural society. Okay. Okay, so the Mayans had a number of different ceremonial centers or cities. And so these are areas where people lived, thousands of individuals lived. In some cases, one of the largest of the Mayan cities is the city of Tikal. Had a population of about 50,000 people at its height. Tikal formed in the end of the pre-classic period and really blossomed during the classic period of the Maya. Right, and so Tikal was one of the major cities, but there was a number of different Mayan cities, right, and each with their own king, and sometimes they would go to war with each other. With Tikal, in particular, they had an enemy called Calakmul, another city called Calakmul, which was their rival, and they went to war with each other several different times. Ultimately, Tikal weakened Calakmul by defeating them. We could take a look at this map and kind of get an idea of some of the Mayan cities. This map shows some of them, not all of them. Here is Tikal. It's located in the area of modern-day Guatemala. Up here's the Yucatan Peninsula. You have Mayans living there as well. Down in Chiapas and even into Honduras, Copan as well, another Mayan city. And so this will give you an idea of the area where the Mayans lived. Number of different Mayan groups. Like I said, different dialects were spoken by the Maya. As well, so it's not one united people. You have a number of different Mayan groups and different kings and kingdoms. Some of the cultural achievements of the Maya. We talked about the cultural achievements of the Olmecs. Some of the cultural achievements of the Maya, one is the creation of the concept of zero, the number zero. All right? Now, that may not sound like a big achievement, but believe it or not, no human civilization came up with the concept of zero before the Maya did, around 200 BCE. All right? The Hindu civilizations in India, or the area that would later become India, also independently came up with the concept of zero on their own. And that's where Western civilization picked up on that concept later on. But that wasn't until hundreds of years after the Maya had came up with the concept of zero. Now, why is the concept of zero important? Well, without the concept of zero, it's not possible to do more complex mathematics. We talked about how the Mayans were advanced in mathematics. That's how they were able to maintain their calendars, calculate into the future, as well as their astronomy. All that's based on mathematics, and you can't do advanced mathematics without the concept of zero. So obviously, it was beneficial for them, being one of the more advanced civilizations in terms of mathematics, right? It's because of their understanding of the concept of zero. It's one of the reasons why. Another aspect of Mayan culture, the calendar round. We talked about earlier, that 52-year cycle. This is most likely because of influence from the Olmecs. Many traditionally believe that the Olmecs were the first to create the calendars and that the Maya had adopted that information from the Olmec influence. Another aspect of the Maya is the use of the long count, which is another type of calendar. And so the long count it allows the Maya to calculate calendar dates going farther back in time and farther into the future in time. And so we have, there's a writing system for the long count. Basically, it's symbolized by dots, right? So one dot represents one day. And so usually you'll have like 1 dot, 2 dot, 3 dot, 4 dots. And when you get to 5, that's symbolized by a bar, okay, just a straight line. And so it was a very simple system, but it allowed the Maya to calculate fairly large numbers, and it was used as a calendar. The long count was used as a calendar and was used to calculate long periods into the future, okay, and into the past. All right, so the long count is another type of calendar that's used by the Maya. It was believed that the Mayans created the long count, but more recently scholars are arguing that the long count was used even by the Olmecs, and as well as other civilizations before the Maya. And so that's also another point of debate. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, the Mayans had a writing system. And their system is considered a true writing system because not only do their hieroglyphs represent concepts or ideas, but some of their hieroglyphs actually represent words in the Mayan language. Okay, and so that makes it a true writing system because they actually represent syllables of words. Some of their hieroglyphs do. Okay. So let's take a look at some images here. Here are some images of Tikal. We're talking about the Mayan city of Tikal. Very large pyramids. Tikal is one of the biggest of the Mayan cities. Their pyramids there are the tallest in the Mayan cities, and so that's why I'm highlighting it here. They have this huge plaza. Here's a couple of the pyramids. I believe there's about 6 pyramids in Tikal altogether. Remember, a population of 50,000, very large city, powerful city. Here's just some example of Mayan hieroglyphs, right? It's just to kind of give you an idea of what they look like. As I mentioned, some of these hieroglyphs represent words in the Mayan language, all right? So just like how our written language represents words, syllables, and words, the Mayans had that as well. And lastly on the Maya, let's talk about their decline. Now, scholars do not agree that there was one particular event that led to the decline of the various Mayan city kingdoms, but it was likely a number of different events that came together to cause the decline. And so one of them being a reduction in rainfall for 200 years. Right? I'm not saying there's no rain, but it's a reduction. It's not as much rainfall as there had been. And so if you don't have as much rain, you're not going to have as much food, right? Your crops may not be as big, and they aren't going to be able to sustain that large population in those various Mayan cities. And so that means a decrease in the food supply for the cities. And so that could definitely hurt your civilization. I mean, it could at least cause some people to be on edge, right? And so there are also some signs that there may have been class tension, so tension between the upper and lower classes. And this is due to something called corvée. What is corvée? Corvée is a system of unpaid labor where Mayan commoners were forced to basically farm without getting paid, and their food was used for the upper class individuals, right? So you have to dedicate some of your time doing this unpaid labor as a member of one of these kingdoms, okay? And so it was said that eventually led to class tensions, right? This unpaid labor, especially because there's a drought going on and there's not as much food available. You're also going to see an increase in warfare between the Mayan city kingdoms, going to war with each other more often, right? Because of these conditions, because there's not as much food, right? Tensions are high. Right, so you have city kingdoms going to war with each other more often, also increases in human sacrifice. Yes, it's believed that the Mayans did participate in rituals that involved human sacrifice. Sometimes it would be self-mutilation, right, not killing yourself, but just cutting parts of your body in order to bleed. This was done even by members of the royal family because it was believed that their royal blood was more of a sacrifice than just a regular person. And the idea was that these blood offerings, these sacrifices, would help to appease the gods, and then the gods would bless their agriculture and allow their societies to go on and continue the cycle of life, right? But since that wasn't happening, the drought was continuing, that meant maybe there was a need for more human sacrifice, right? And so sometimes it was self-inflicted, but other times you would have war captives that would be sacrificed, and they would be killed as a sacrifice, right? So that happened as well. And so the idea is that with this increased warfare, this period of drought, with tensions going on between the classes, all this may have combined together to bring about the decline of the Mayan city kingdoms. Now, the Mayans didn't disappear. They're still there today. There's like 20 million Maya who are alive today and well. So they didn't disappear, but they did abandon their cities, and they lived in smaller villages.